So what should I do?
When I say next slide, just hit
The right side.
the right button.
Okay. Just like the old thing.
Good?
Yes, sir.
Hello. Hey everybody, welcome to DEF CON 402, October's version. Couple things of note. Make sure to pay your tabs. We don't want anybody walking out on their tabs. That's happened before, so just always mention it. We are going to probably continue to have in-person meetings for the time being. Keep your eyes on Slack if you're not sure if there's going to be another in-person. Next month is, we have a speaker exchange, Tim, is that right? With what group is it?
Next month, I don't even know how to describe it, I should have been more prepared. So University of Lincoln, UNL, has a center on cyber and space, not cyberspace, cyber and space, like actual outer space policy out of their law college, the College of Law. So they're going to come down and like give us a brief that is catered to us, like more about what we're doing back then.
Awesome. So yeah, that's the plan for November, and then in December we plan on doing our typical lightning talks that we do every Christmas seasonal time frame there. So if you want to do a lightning talk, please go to DC402.com, hit the speaker tab, let us know. Lightning talks can be 5 minutes, 15 minutes. It's a really good opportunity, especially if it's your first time speaking in front of a group like this, just to get some exposure. This is a very friendly group for first-time speakers, so you're always welcome to reach out to if you're not so sure, if you like your topic or want help finessing your slides, feel free to reach out to us.
Are you excited or are you stressed?
With that said, we'll go ahead and get started. The only other thing was there's a DEF CON 402 Slack. I mentioned it earlier. If you're not in it, let me know or Tim know. We can add you guys and get you in the Slack. It's a great place to have our conversations, talk about it. We've got Twitter that you can follow and meet up as well. All right. So with that said, this is Crypto Jones in Slack, or Aaron. He has driven 2 hours and 45 minutes to give you the talk tonight. So let's give it up for him.
All right, so apparently this is not a vape, so I can't de-stress while I'm talking, unfortunately. But tonight's talk is digital forensics Braindrump. This is basically all of the material from my digital forensics class through RITX. It's basically it's the classes from RIT that are on edx.org, and you do 4 classes, and then you have like a what do you call a capstone class, and then you get like a MicroMasters in cybersecurity. Then you apply to the RIT graduate school for their graduate certificate class. You take 1 graduate course, then you get an actual graduate certificate from RIT in cybersecurity. So kind of cool program, pretty inexpensive for graduate schools, especially for private school. So definitely check them out. You can audit the course for free for like the first 4 weeks or whatever. Anyway, next slide, please. All right, so who am I? Crypto Jones. I'm a cloud support engineer for an AWS startup out of Florida. Also a graduate student in RIT and WGU. And KernelCon 2019 was actually my first hacker convention, so DC402 was my first kind of foray into computer security officially. And then, I don't know what those icons mean at the bottom, but they have my name on it, so it must be important. Next slide, please. All right, so this is forensics introduction. What, who, how, why. Hopefully they're in that order. I apologize if they're not. Next slide, please. So, what is forensics? Forensics is just the scientific process of collecting, preserving, analyzing, and reporting on legally admissible data. Farmer and Venom, they describe it as gathering and analyzing data in a manner as free from distortion or bias as possible to reconstruct data on what has happened in the past on a system. So whether it's incident response or evidence gathering, the process of figuring out what happened on the system and documenting that and eventually presenting on that possibly in court or via a paper report. So next slide, please.
So you want people to interrupt you, or do you want like hold questions?
Yeah, could you hold questions till the end?
Yeah, okay.
Especially if your name is Adlington, for sure. The 4 steps for digital forensics is to collect, preserve, analyze, and then present. I use the CCAP acronym to remember this for the quiz, so that's how I did that. Next slide, please. So the digital forensics is actually carved out into several different subdomains. You have computer forensics, which is what this class is actually focused on, with Unix and Windows, and which includes memory forensics, RAM. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's also mobile device forensics and network forensics. Network forensics is really interesting. I know that Colonel Con, we had like a Wireshark workshop that first year with Colonel Con, so that's definitely worth doing if you have the opportunity as well. The next slide, please. So, all right, these guys. Who does forensics? This is Dan Farmer in Ftk Imager, I believe. Ftk. Okay. They released the Corners Toolkit for a computer forensics analysis class in 1999. Believe it or not, Dan Farmer, the guy on the left, he is employee number 6 of the computer emergency response team. Super smart guy. He talked at DEF CON 1, DEF CON 2, and I think he gave a workshop at talk at DEF CON 3. So he's been in the security game for as long as some of us, not me, but some of those guys. Next slide, please. And so who does forensics now? It's people like you and me who are computer security experts who serve as expert witnesses in trials. So we have to follow the precise procedures of court, which means establishing what's called a chain of custody. We have to testify on what our findings are, analysis and conclusions, and then demonstrate the scientific knowledge associated with digital forensics. One of the things that I found really interesting about this is when it says analysis and conclusions. A lot of legal shows you see on TV, like they're like just the facts, man, right? They don't want you to give an opinion, but when you are the expert witness for these, the prosecution or defense will ask you for your opinion on what happened. So I thought that was really interesting for this particular role. So the next slide, please. So how do you do this? How do you go through this process? Well, like I said, first thing you have to do is you document everything before you even touch the actual the system you're going to analyze. You got to establish the chain of custody and write everything down. Second, really important, is you have to use write blockers. So because evidence is required to be free from tampering, we use write blockers on the machine you're analyzing, so that when you are doing anything to it, you're not actually writing data to that system. So the next step is to acquire the volatile forensic data. And what this means is your RAM, the system's RAM, the system's network connections, those types of things. Anything that would basically dissipate or be removed when you pull power from the system. And then you would acquire the non-volatile forensics data, which is your actual hard drives, your CD-ROMs, what have you. Very interesting is you're analyzing a copy of the forensics data, and that original image actually goes into evidence storage. So you can basically prove that you didn't touch the actual system. And just like pen testing, the most important part is writing the report. So if it was fun, everybody would do it, right? There's report templates on the internet. They're pretty exhaustive, and I'm glad they don't have to do that for a living because it's a lot of work. And then the testifying, which to me sounds like the funnest part. It's getting to be on the stand and talking about your findings and what you did. Next slide. So, how do we do this? So, when we have a system, we use multiple cryptographic hashes to verify that the data that we're analyzing is the same as the target system. And through this class, they talked about multiple different tools, and we're going to go into some of these in here. Some of them are like Helix Pro. Some of them are like deprecated, kind of older. I know I looked around, I found like a 2008 version of the original Helix on torrents, but I couldn't download a trial for Helix Pro. I'm not sure if they went out of business or what have you. Next slide, please. All right. So why do we do this? A guy named Aaron, not me, a different Aaron, said computer security isn't all sunshine and rainbows, right? And so we do this because we need evidence for non-electronic crimes. We need evidence for evidence in civil litigation, and like incident response for when a system's been hacked or tampered with. We want to go in and find out what happened. And also child sexual exploitation material. Unfortunately, there's people out in the world that do that, and law enforcement's job is to hold them accountable. So part of this process is analyzing images and audio files on computers. Next slide, please. All right, so the first section is Unix forensics. Obviously, it started out with Unix and moved into Linux. Next slide, please. First, when you're acquiring your data, you want to get the volatile first, like I said, which is your RAM, your processes, network connections, and then your non-volatile last, and then everything else, which can be like CD-ROMs, like physical printouts, like the hacker zines that are pasted on the wall or whatever. Next slide, please. So, how do we acquire? Once we have physical access, how do we acquire the volatile memory? So, we have memdump for Linux, Unix, and FreeBSD, and then there's a tool called the Linux Memory Extractor, or Lime, which is open source. There's also fmem, which allows you to plug in a kernel module, like using insmod, and you can write, you can copy a copy of the mem right to a pseudo device using DD. So that's pretty cool. Next slide, please. So there are some commercial tools that allow you to do all this over the network. I couldn't afford to buy any of this stuff for this class, so if someone wants to sponsor me, I'll be glad to do a report on it, Adam or Tim, and come back and talk on that specifically. But they use licensed dongles, and basically you have one for the remote system and then one for your forensic workstation, and it allows you to reach across the network, get both RAM, like both volatile and non-volatile data. So next slide, please. So in addition to RAM contents, volatile information that we want to look at is open files, network connections, logged in users, uptime, etc. excuse me, next slide, please. So, for network connections in Linux and Unix, we have netstat, which probably a lot of us are already familiar with. But then we have LSOF, which is actually a really cool tool that I only learned about through this class. Next slide, please. So netstat, we can show all the TCP ports, all the UDP ports. We can show all the listening connections, and then with that fourth option, -TP, we can actually show the process ID and the name, process name of the application that's out there listening. So, next slide. LSOF, list of open files. This is a really cool tool. You can list all your open files. You can list the internet connections belonging to an IP address. You can see all the open files in a specific device. And if you do an LSOF and then the file name, you can show all the processes that have that handle open. So really cool tool. Again, just learned about it, and I was like, man, this is cool. I wish I would have known this like 20 years ago. Next, please. All right. So in addition to RAM, volatile information, all open files, network connections. I feel like I've said this before, I apologize. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, we want to make sure that we're not writing to our the machine that we're looking at. They have commercial write blockers that'll allow us to pull volatile data, or excuse me, non-volatile data, and make copies. This soft case write blocker device is really cool. They also have, I'm sorry, this is the hardware bridge from Guiding Software. The software writing blocks include NCase, fast block, safe block, Win8, and obviously we have DD in there, that's not a write blocker. Anywho, then again, the hardware write blockers, this Tableau, forensic bridge, and then they have other things like an actual forensic workstations, fast block, and ultra block. Next slide, please. All right, so hard drive imaging. So a bitstream copy gets every 0 and 1 on the disk, whereas just using the CP command or what have you does not. So we have specific utilities that do this. We have the Ftk Imager. The Ftk Imager is actually a free utility that is part of the forensics toolkit, but you can download it separately. We also have the high-speed hardware images, like we just saw from the Tableau example, and then the Unix DB utility. Next slide, please. All right, so that brings us to Windows forensics. Next slide, please. So for RAM usage, Helix Pro, which I mentioned, is kind of difficult to get. Memory DD, Ftk Imager works on both Linux and Windows. There's a program called Live RAM Capture and Windows Scope. And then Windows also has its own version of netstat. To look at processes, we have PS Info and PS Tools. And last two is we want to look at the loaded DLLs, and we also want to look at the Windows registry. Interesting thing about the Windows registry is there's a lot of different security information in there, and I kind of skipped through that because I didn't get a very good grade on that quiz, so I didn't want to speak unintelligently on it. So next slide. Okay, so you have digital forensics. We also have what's called anti-digital forensics. For example, if I know the Secret Service is coming into my house because I stole a garbage file, I'm going to do everything I can, right, to make it to where they can't find it. So next slide, please. So anti-digital forensics is designed to thwart the discovery of information about activities on a system or network. I want to manipulate, erase, or obfuscate digital data and make its examination difficult, time-consuming, and practically impossible. Next slide, please. All right, so full disk encryption. this is probably one of the easiest ways to slow down people doing digital forensics on your system. It basically encrypts the full drive. There's a workaround. Some smart people figured out that you can cold boot the system and still have access to the RAM. Copy the RAM into a utility and pull out encryption keys from the RAM copy, which to me was mind-blowing. I had no idea until this class that was even possible. And then you have the classic way of somebody just getting a wrench and beating you until you give them your encryption key. So, next slide, please. All right. So another anti-digital forensics technique is changing the mace values. Timestamp is really common. Touch. Set mace is another Windows utility. And then disabling timestamps and the prefetch and the last access time through the registry is another way you can go in and do anti-digital forensics. Next slide, please. Okay, so onion routing VPNs. These are basically used to counter the ISP / network history. They're not foolproof. They're outside the scope of this course, but I just wanted to mention them because that is something that, as a forensic examiner, you might run into. Next slide, please. All right, so we talked about a lot of software tools in this class. I just to kind of figure out what I actually went through them one by one to figure out which ones would be worth looking at. Next slide. So, Safe Workstation. This is from SANS. If you've ever done one of their, what is it called? Yeah, one of their the CTF things. They use this. They use one of these, the OVA file with this on it, and you have to go in and like look through PCAPs and what have you. It's a really cool little bootable utility based on Ubuntu. And it has the sleuth kit, Classo and log2time for actually making your report, SSD and MD5 foremost is Scalpel, Volatility Framework, and then Autopsy. And you can get it at sans.org, the tools, Safe Workstation. Next slide, please. All right, so Linux memory extractor, we talked about that. It's like FMem, and then it uses a kernel module to inject, and then you can make a copy of the RAM, and you can pass it off to like Volatility Framework for analysis. It's open source. You can find the guy on GitHub. Next slide, please. So Volatility Framework is used for RAM extraction. It supports Windows, Linux, and Mac. They just rewrote version 3 in Python and put it on GitHub as open source. You can find it on volatilityfoundation.org. Next slide, please. So Ftk Imager, this is a commercial software, it's part of a commercial software package from Access Data, but it's actually a standalone disk imager that comes as part of their Forensic Toolkit package. But they give it to you for free. And I believe I said this before, but when we're doing hashes of systems, we need to do 2 different hashes for non-repudiation. MD5 is known to have collisions, so we need to make sure that we have 2 hashes to prove that the system that we're talking about is the same system that we have in evidence. And there's the URL for that. Next slide, please. Helix. This was one of the original memory extraction tools. I found like a 2008 version on the torrents. Version 3 went paid in pro, and I tried to buy it just to play with it, but you can't purchase it anymore. And I contacted them, and they never got back to me. So I'm not sure if they went out of business or what, but they had Helix 3 Pro and Enterprise. but the site hasn't been updated in a while, so. Next slide, please. So, eFence Live Response. This, again, requires RAM and throws it on a USB thumb drive. It was built on Helix 3, and again, eFence inside isn't working, so we couldn't get a copy of this one. Next, please. So, there's a range of paid tools that do digital forensics. The benefit of this specific tool is it does memory file analysis over the network, and there's a huge product matrix of all the different features of the software product. It's definitely worth checking out, especially if you can get Tim or Adam to pay for stuff. So next slide, please. All right, so we got SleuthKit and Autopsy. This is one of the cooler ones. SleuthKit is actually the command line tools, and then Autopsy is the GUI front end for it. These are the little mascots. I think this is probably my favorite tool just because of the dogs. So I'm 100% biased. Next slide, please. Okay, Foremost. This is a freeware console program that does file carving and file recovery. File carving, and again, I probably shouldn't be talking about this until I'm 100% sure, but I believe what file carving is using your start block and your end block, and being able to carve out files from memory address pointers. And someone at the end of this class might be able to talk more intelligently about that than I can, but Foremost does that. So next slide, please. Okay, Moonsoul's Dump It. It's again, it is also an older tool. Can't find a link for it anywhere. Everything was dead, but it was free. If that counts for anything. So, next slide. And then WinEN. This is the standalone memory extraction tool from Encase. It's included in Helix, but again, because Helix site is either the company went out of business or whatever, couldn't get a copy of it to play with. Next slide, please. And then Redline from FireEye. This is kind of a cool freeware utility. You can go in and basically do all your like incident response stuff on it. It plugs into their other products that allow you to collate the timeline and build up a really good case for court. And then you have your IOC analysis, which is more for incident response. But it's definitely a cool program to check out. Next slide. Okay, then we have the Recall Memory Forensics Toolkit. It's started out just for RAM extraction, but then it ballooned into this entire framework. It's on Google's GitHub, but I don't know if they actually started or not. So next slide, please. All right, so conclusion. Next slide, please. All right, so one is to always have your own tools. You need to assume that your target system you're analyzing is compromised. You want to run your tools from your own USB or even your own forensics workstation, and you want to save the output, always save the output to an external system. Next slide, please. Yeah, so once you have a copy of your volatile memory and your network connections, all that, you want to pull the cord from the system. You do this because cleanly shutting down a system might trigger scripts or programs that someone has put in there to remove traces of a compromise or do other things to the system. So next slide, please. Yeah. So pro tips: always use a write blocker. We only said that about 1 million times in this class, so I think it's probably important. Next. When you have a drive that you're outputting information from a target system to, you want to make sure you completely wipe the drive before you start writing data to it, and this prevents there from being any any question that the data you're actually analyzing is the target system's data. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the questions part. Again, this is my first introduction to digital forensics, so I might not have the answer for you, but I can refer you to some gentlemen who I know might probably have the answers. So are there any questions?
Is your interest stronger or lower after taking course?
So I think it's definitely stronger. Having said that, just like everything else in cybersecurity, this could easily be a huge rabbit hole. I'll get sucked into, and then 15 years have gone by, and that's all I've done. So I definitely think I'm going to leave this stuff to the professionals and people who know what they're doing. But it was definitely interesting to learn about. I really liked the forensics toolkit. That was pretty cool. And then sleuth kit was pretty cool. Yes, sir.
Two things. Did you get to play with volatility much in this class?
So they demoed it. They did demo it, but I didn't get a chance to play with it very much.
There's a lot there. It could be a class in itself. The second one was you seemed unsure on foremost and carving, but you were right on. It's exactly what it is. You're looking for headers, you're looking for footers. It gets tricky when things are non-contiguous, but Scalpel was actually forked from foremost, and Scalpel is badass. I highly recommend it.
Now, was that for extracting like data from, like, let's say they like wiped a drive, but you're extracting the sectors that actually weren't used?
Absolutely. So it's an unallocated space. If you need to find a JPEG, you look for the header, look for the footer. Pretty easy to do. And Scalpel's sweet because you can just go right in the config file, give it those settings, and it'll give you everything.
Oh, one thing I forgot to put in here that was really cool I learned, for like child sexual exploitation material, when people remove files from their computer, the thumbnail data is still inside your computer, so you can easily pull your thumbnail files and prove, like right off the bat, that someone had the files they say they don't have. So I thought that was really cool. I apologize for not putting that in there.
Definitely use Scalpel over foremost. Scalpel
Fair.
is like it's evolution of foremost. And I think a better way, it's usually associated with slack space and getting files where there's the file system isn't aware that there's content there. But you can use it. So like the way it really works technically is there's a signature of the thing that might be a file, like these bytes are what starts the file, these bytes are and so forth. Files might cross multiple blocks. So like the start bytes of a file might be in a completely different part of the disk, and bytes might be over here. Either half of this is fragmented. But you can use something like Scalpel to our network streams, Vpns. You can use it to our container type files and PDFs. So it's really cool to be able to quickly find content, whether it's in
And just to clarify, slack space is space that's not used on a drive yet. Right?
Yeah, there's different types of slack, but most of the time when people talk about it, so the files, the hard disk is this big. The file system has metadata that says this piece and this piece and this piece are in use right now, but the file system is aware of. Slack space would be the opposite of that, inverted space.
Which might have data from the previous installation.
But depending on how pedantic you want to be, like EFI formatted hard disk might have parts of the disk that were never available to the file. I think that's how the disk works. That could also be considered slack space. Or sites work for now, like so OEMs reserve space at the beginning of the disk for like operating system recovery and things like that. Sometimes those are formatted in special ways. That also could be considered slack. So it's just stuff that the file system is aware of.
Well, I'm going to give this non-working beta.
Thank you, Aaron. Everyone else, let's give it up for Aaron. So usually, if you're new to this, just so you know, the meetings usually run from about 6 to 8, and
Good job.
6 everyone meets up, chats.